to be covering a lot today. Welcome to Chapter 3 of my Black Myth Wukong Deep Dive series, where we're exploring the game's story in great detail. I'll be going through the various plot lines and characters, while also providing cultural and literary context, plus my own commentary and deductions for what it all means. There will be lots of spoilers, so be warned. This chapter is the longest out of the entire game, so for narrative purposes and organization, I'm going to be bundling the different storylines together. I highly recommend you check out my story breakdowns for the previous chapters if you haven't already. The full playlist will be linked in the description box. We need to start with relevant context from Journey to the West because we'll miss a lot in the game if we don't have background. In the novel, the traveling band of Tang Sanzang the monk, Sun Wukong the monkey, Zhu Bajie the pig, Sha Wuqing the sand guai, and Bai Long Ma the white horse are continuing their journey westward, and they eventually encounter a monastery that looks like Loooong Thunderclap Temple. As a refresher on the geography, Thunderclap Temple is located on Lingshan, Spirit Mountain, and this area is called Xitian, the Western Heaven, where Rulai Fo resides. This is the ultimate destination of the pilgrimage because Buddha is the ultimate authority in the Buddhist realm and is the one holding the sacred scriptures that the group is seeking. Wukong investigates the area first and tells his master that there's something ominous about the atmosphere and that they shouldn't go inside. The monk doesn't believe him, saying, "Well, it looks like Thunderclap Temple." Wukong says, "No, I've been to the real temple before. This road and the distance we've traveled so far is not correct." Even Bajie and Wuqing chime in, saying he shouldn't be so suspicious. So Wukong is like, "Fine." The group approaches the monastery and the monk sees the 3 characters for Loooong Thunderclap Temple written above the gate, and he immediately chastises Wukong for tricking him. The monkey goes, "Please use your eyes. There are 4 characters written above the gate. It says Xiao Loooong Si. Xiao means small, so clearly not the same place they're looking for." Despite his counsel, the monk still insists on going in, reasoning that perhaps a different Buddha lives here, or at the very least there would be a statue of a Buddha, and he had to honor his vow to bow before everyone he passes. So they go in and see like 500 arhats, 8 bodhisattvas, countless monks, and other lay people. The monk, Bajie, and Wuqing literally bow with every step, but Wukong alone stays upright. Then a voice shouts, "Jian Rulai, 怎么不拜? You see Rulai Buddha, why don't you bow?" Remember this line because it does become relevant in the game later. Now the monkey isn't fooled. Wukong brandishes his cudgel, saying, "How dare you pretend to be the Buddha?" But before he could attack, a pair of golden symbols closes around his body and traps him within, and all the other Buddhist figures capture the rest of the group to be steamed and eaten. Wukong was right. The Buddha was actually a Yaoguai king in disguise, and his followers were all Yaoguai as well. This entire little Thunderclap Temple was just a ploy to capture the group. Trapped inside the golden symbols, Wukong starts to sweat profusely because this was a magical artifact that can melt its prisoners into pus and blood within 3 days. He tries a bunch of different methods to get out, growing super big, shrinking super small, but the symbols change sizes with him. He also tries banging around with his cudgel and even turns his hairs into a drill, but still the symbols don't budge. He's so desperate, he recites an incantation to summon the 5 protectors, the 6 Ding, the 6 Jia, and the 18 guardians of the faith to appear, but even they couldn't crack it open. You don't need to know who all of these individuals are. They're basically a bunch of deities and Taoist celestial protectors who were supposed to help safeguard the monk on his journey. But do remember the 6th Thing and the 6th Jia, because these are the Zodiacs in Black Myth, who will make a bigger appearance in Chapter 3. One of these summoned deities, the golden-headed Vajra Guardian, who is the leader of the 5 protectors, immediately goes to the Jade Emperor to implore him for assistance. Hearing what happened, the Jade Emperor dispatches the 28 who are celestial deities that represent star constellations and serve as heavenly generals. For background, the 28 constellations are drawn from traditional Chinese astronomy, and they're divided into 4 groups, each associated with mythological creatures that represent the 4 cardinal directions. These 4 include the azure dragon of the east, the black tortoise of the north, the white tiger of the west, and the vermilion bird of the south. During Sun Wukong's first havoc in heaven, the Jade Emperor actually called upon the 28 constellations to fight him, with no success until Buddha intervened. And later on throughout the novel, they appear again to aid the group when the pilgrims face overwhelming challenges. This was one of those instances. So they too use all their weapons to try to force the symbols open, but even they fail to move the metal even a smidge. One of the constellations, Kang Loong, says that the symbols must be a 如意之物, an as-you-wish object, which is an artifact that can change depending on its master's wishes. If this sounds familiar, this is because Wukong's staff is also a 如意 object called the 如意金箍棒, the as-you-wish gold-banded cudgel. Kang Loong says that he, yes, he's technically male in the book, will push his horn in where the symbols meet and makes himself so small that his horn is the size of a needlepoint. He jabs into the symbols, exerting tremendous effort, and finally manages to pierce the symbols. He then grows bigger and the symbols immediately adjust to seal around the horn. Wukong then uses his cudgel to drill a small hole in Kang Loong's horn and shrinks himself down to the size of a mustard seed, which are only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter and one of the smallest seeds on the planet, and jumps into the hole. Exerting great effort once again, Kang Loong pulls out his horn with Wukong in it and then collapses with exhaustion. Wukong then grows back to his normal size and smashes the symbols into thousands of pieces with his Jinggu-bang. That probably helped to let off some steam. Get it? Because it was hot inside the symbols? Anyways, the loud noise from destroying the symbols wakes up all the Yao Guai, so Wukong and the Constellations take to the skies. Yellowbrow collects the broken pieces of the symbols and grabs his Lang Ya Bang, a wolf's tooth spiked mace, which Black Myth translates as the spike shaft cudgel. He shouts at Wukong that a real man doesn't run from a fight and to come fight him for 3 rounds. This was pretty clever of Yellowbrow because the monkey has a good amount of pride and clearly wasn't going to stand for his smack talk. So Wukong lands back on the ground and demands to know how the Yao Guai had the audacity to pose as Buddha. The Yao Guai king then speaks very highly of himself, saying that he's called the Yellowbrow Buddha and that heaven had rewarded him because of his cultivation. He then says that he'll spare the group if Wukong can beat him, but if not, he'll go to see Rulai Buddha to fetch the scriptures himself. Now, this was a very brief line in the novel. Honestly, it kind of feels like a throwaway even, but Black Myth specifically expands on this, which I'll get into later. Wukong ends up fighting Yellowbrow for 50 rounds, with neither gaining the upper hand. See how we have an increase in power level as the game progresses? The Black Bear Guai from Chapter 1 was 10 rounds, the Yellow Wind Sage from Chapter 2 was 30 rounds, and now Yellowbrow was 50 rounds. While the pair was dueling, the 28 Constellations and the 5 Protectors were fighting all the other Yao Guai as well. Eventually, Yellowbrow whips out a cotton pouch which sucks all of them in, including Wukong. This is the 人种袋, the human seed bag. The bag rendered their muscles numb and bones weak, so Yellowbrow was able to remove them one by one to tie them up. Yellowbrow then holds a banquet to celebrate, and they all go to sleep after. During the night, Wukong hears the sound of weeping and recognizes it as his master, who was bemoaning the fact that he didn't heed the monkey's warnings. Hearing this, Wukong uses magic to make himself super small to slip out of his bonds and goes to free his group. They go on ahead first, while Wukong stays behind to look for their luggage. To avoid making any noise that would wake up the sleeping Yao Guai, Wukong turns himself into a bat to fly around and manages to locate their luggage. Unfortunately, he drops something and the noise wakes everybody up, so Wukong abandons the items to escape. Yellowbrow and his horde of Yao Guai manage to find the monks group, the 28 Constellations, and the 5 Protectors, and they all fight again straight into the night. After a while, Yellowbrow takes out his cotton pouch once more, and Wukong sees this. He says, "Not good, let's leave," and somersaults into the sky again. But everyone else failed to understand, so they were all caught in the bag and tied up yet again. Wukong clearly needs to re-strategize, so he goes to find Dangmo Tianzun, the heavenly lord of subduing demons. He is also known as Zhenwu Dadi, or Xuanwu, who is a Taoist deity in Chinese mythology and is said to govern the northern quadrant of the 28 constellations. While Dangmo Tianzun is empathetic to his plight, he says that he cannot act on his own authority without heaven's instructions. And if you watch my chapter 2 video, you'll know this same issue has happened before with the Dragon King of the Jing River, who got the death penalty for defying heaven's decree. In Black Myth, one of his sons, the Black Dragon, even straight up says that he doesn't dare to call even the smallest storm unless commanded by those higher up. As a middle ground, 大魔天尊 sends his 2 generals, General Tortoise and General Snake, plus 5 magic dragons to help, and they all go to Little Thunderclap Temple to confront Yellowbrow. But Yellowbrow once again whips out his pouch. Wukong tells his allies to watch out, but they all get captured, and he alone manages to escape by somersaulting into the heavens. Perhaps he should have warned his allies about the pouch beforehand, since it's continuing to be an issue. Wukong is understandably depressed at this point, but a Gong Cao appears, who is essentially like an assistant or a clerk of a higher ranking deity. This character tells Wukong that the allies Yellowbrow captured have been thrown into a pit and that he should go seek out Da Sheng, Guo Shi Wang Pusa, great sage, teacher, king, bodhisattva. The game just calls him Bodhisattva Guo Shi Wang. This deity has a disciple called Xiaozhang Taizi. Under the prince's command are the 4 divine generals. So Wukong goes to find Guo Shi Wang, and he agrees to send his disciple plus his 4 generals. The group fights Yellowbrow, and again they're at a standstill. 3 guesses what happens next. Yellowbrow brings out his pouch. Again, Wukong says watch out, and again they're all captured while Wukong manages to escape. At this point, the monkey starts to cry, but then a voice calls out to him, and this was none other than the smiling Buddha, Milefu. To clarify, earlier, Yellowbrow pretended to be Rulaifu, who is the current Buddha, but Milefu is the Buddha of the future, meaning he is supposed to succeed Rulai as the next Buddha. Milefu tells Wukong that Yellowbrow was originally his attendant who used to strike his stone chime, but while he was away at an assembly, Yellowbrow stole his treasures and became a Yao Guai, masquerading as a Buddha. So all the artifacts that Yellowbrow used actually belongs to Milefu, the symbols, the pouch, as well as the mace, which was originally the stick used for striking the chime. Milefu concocts the plan and tells Wukong to challenge Yellowbrow again in order to lure him to a little hut with a melon patch. He then gives the monkey a spell. He has Wukong hold out his hand, dips his finger in his mouth, and uses his magical saliva to write the character for Jing, which means prohibit or restrict, onto his palm. He tells the monkey to make a fist and that if he opens that hand again in Yellowbrow's face, he will certainly come after him. The monkey follows the plan, goes to fight Yellowbrow, and opens his fist in the Yao Guai's face. Sure enough, he falls under the spell and doesn't use the pouch. Wukong then runs away to the melon patch and turns himself into a big, juicy, ripe watermelon. When Yellowbrow arrives, Mila comes out of the hut disguised as a melon grower. The Yao Guai asks him for a ripe watermelon, and Mila gives him the transformed Wukong. Yellowbrow takes a bite, and Wukong immediately starts attacking him from within, kicking, clawing, gripping at his stomach, and somersaulting around his entrails, causing Yellowbrow to roll around in pain and beg for mercy. Milefu transforms back into his true form and tells Wukong to spare him. The monkey beats him up a bit more for good measure, but then acquiesces and jumps out of Yellowbrow's mouth. Milefu captures Yellowbrow in the pouch, repairs the broken symbols, and departs. Wukong is then able to free his group and rescue all of his allies from the pit, including the 5 dragons, General Tortoise and General Snake, Little Prince Zhang and his 4 generals, the 28 constellations, plus all of the protectors and guardians he had originally summoned. If you've played through Chapter 3, there should be multiple characters here that you recognize from the game. But are any of you wondering about the timing of Milefu's appearance? How convenient it was that he arrived just when Wukong exhausted all other options? It was a common occurrence for Wukong to receive help from his enemy's master when he couldn't beat them himself. But we have also seen recurring instances in both Journey to the West and Black Myth where characters can't do anything without their master's permission. So who is really responsible when bad things happen? The master or the guai? We'll have to see. Now that we're all caught up on the relevant chapters of Journey to the West, we can jump into Chapter 3, White Snow, ice cold. And here we open up on an adorable baby-looking Buddha dressed in blue. His cheeks are so plump, I just want to squish his chubby face. This is Milefo, the Buddha of the future and the successor to Rulaifo. In Chinese iconography, he's often depicted as an adult with a big belly and a smile on his face. And after eyeing one particularly fearsome-looking statue with a knowing look, see what he turns into? A statue of a Buddha with a big belly and a smile on his face. So why does he look like a child here? I can only speculate that this is a visual cue that he is the future. Kind of like saying he'll grow up to be the Buddha someday. Not yet, but someday. The specific statue that he was looking at is a statue of Shi Huo Zhu, and this is one of the 28 the 28 constellations, which are often called the 28 mansions in English because the stars are said to reside in the sky. These constellations are from an old astronomical system in China that was used to track the moon's movements. The lunar cycle takes about 28 days to revolve around the Earth, so we have 28 constellations. This 28 is further split into 4 groups of 7, corresponding to the 4 cardinal directions. The 7 constellations in the eastern quadrant of the Azure Dragon are visible during spring. Those in the southern quadrant of the Vermilion Bird can be seen in the summer. The ones in the western quadrant of the White Tiger are visible in autumn, and those in the northern quadrant of the Black Tortoise are seen in winter. Shi Huo Zhu is in this quadrant, so kind of makes sense why chapter 3 is so snowy, huh? This system also has a lot of folklore and mythology wrapped into it as well. So in Journey to the West, these constellations are all immortals, and their names can be broken down into 3 characters or parts. The first character is the name of the body of the star. The second character is one of the 7 observable celestial bodies or planets. The third character is a mythological beast or animal. So applying this to the statue the destined one was disguised as, the first character means encampment. The second character is Huo, which is the element of fire, meaning Mars. And the third character is the animal Zhu, which means pig, foreshadowing. In this space, we can see statues for all of the constellations, and these actually exist in real life in Yuhuang Miao, the Jade Emperor Temple located in Shanxi province of China. Yuhuang Miao is described as a masterpiece among Taoist temples and features a lot of ancient architecture and other cultural relics. Each statue also includes the animal the constellations are associated with. And if we take a look at the one for Shi Huo Zhu, notice that the belt also has a big snout, kind of like a pig. More foreshadowing! However, this is the only constellation statue that doesn't have its corresponding animal next to it. His pig is actually placed on the beams of the real-life temple's chamber, supposedly as a ward against fires. Another cool thing about the 28 constellations is one of them was a character named Lang in Journey to the West. He had an affair with a jade maiden in heaven, and they voluntarily decided to descend into the mortal realm because remember, love is forbidden in the celestial court. So she became a mortal princess, but he became a Yao Guai called the Yellow Robe Guai. I won't get into the full story for the sake of time, but he had a special elixir pill called the Loooong. He had spent a very long time cultivating it, and it was described to be the size of a chicken. And in Black myth, Loooong is the Chinese name of the mind cores we use to craft our own elixir pills to boost our stats. So I thought that was a cool Easter egg. Regrettably, we don't actually get to meet Lang in Black myth. However, we do get to meet a different constellation. But to get to her, we need a little transformation help from the Keeper of the New West, a bird with a human head. He snidely remarks that we're trying so hard for that thing, Wukong's relic, and turns us into a bat, which is a callback to when Wukong transformed into a bat in the novel, as mentioned earlier. We're then able to take flight and follow him deeper into the snowy depths of the mountains. Upon landing, he tells us the relic we seek is hidden in the temple on the lake, and that we should try to take it while the master, Yellowbrow, is away. Stepping onto the frozen lake, we first see a golden orange figure beneath the ice. This is in fact the relic we're seeking this chapter, and we can deduce this because the baby Buddha that appears tells us that it still remembers us. We saw this happen in chapter 1 when the black bear tried to escape with Wukong's eye relic, but it refused to obey and brought him down to the ground instead, as if sensing that it belongs with the destined one. As for this baby Buddha, his speech and his mannerisms are quite quite different from what we saw from the baby Buddha in the opening scene. Plus, he's now dressed in a gaudy shade of yellow and adorned with some very flashy accessories. It's pretty clear this is not Milefo at all, but Yellowbrow in disguise. Interestingly, he remarks that his sack, the same human seed sack from the novel, has collected many monkeys, suggesting these may have been previous aspiring destined ones. But then, he summons one of the 28 constellations, Cyan Loong, to fight us. This deity belongs to the eastern quadrant of the Azure Dragon, and using the naming scheme I described earlier, Kang means neck, Jing means gold, which represents Venus, and Loong means dragon. Knowing what we know about Journey to the West, we should immediately find it odd that Cyan Loong is under Yellowbrow's command. This is because Cyan Loong and Wukong were allies in the novel. He helped get the monkey out of the symbols and fought together against Yellowbrow's forces. So why is she now on his side? From her portrait entry, we learned that Yellowbrow returned to the New West and was holding a banquet around the same time that another character called the Dawnstar disappeared. While not explicitly confirmed, the Dawnstar is likely to be Xingguan, who is another one of the 28 constellations. This character becomes more relevant in Chapter 4, so more on that in my next video. But for now, what we know is Cyan Loong attended Yellowbrow's ceremony, intending to secretly investigate his disappearance, only to end up vanishing without a trace herself. Since both Xingguan and Cyan Loong were allies of Sun Wukong, the other constellations speculated that this must have something to do with the Great Sage, and grew fearful because of their own connections to the monkey. As soon as Wukong became an enemy of the Celestial Court, so many of his allies, who used to boast about their friendship with the monkey, all became silent, and Kui Mulang calls them out on this. This journal entry also doesn't actually tell us what happened to Cyan Loong, so like many things in the game, we gotta beat things up first, then ask questions later. Upon defeating Cyan Loong, we fall into the frozen lake and appear to have a dream of the Macaque Chief about to land a killing blow, only to wake up in a prison cell within the Pagoda Realm. After escaping that hellscape, we can emerge back out into the snow and encounter her once more, this time in her humanoid form as Cyan Star. Upon approaching, we can see she's mid-conversation with someone who is trapped inside a pair of giant symbols, the same ones Wukong was trapped in Journey to the West. And she addresses this person as Admiral. There's only one character who this could be, especially since the voice inside the symbols does some pretty scandalous flirting. Specifically, he invites her to come in and shuangxiu with him. Shuangxiu can be translated to dual cultivation. It's a Taoist practice where two people essentially exchange and refine their energies. It's often used as a euphemism for lovemaking. So this is not something one openly says in civilized conversation, but it does fall right in line with the perverted personality of one particular pig. Their conversation is also quite illuminating from a story standpoint.
看来那老贼得了师兄的玩意儿，果然功力大涨，连你这东天小官都被训得糊糊的。
In other words, by using Wukong's relic, Yellowbrow was able to amplify his powers to the point where he could even manage to trick an immortal like her. So not only could the seed sack contain living beings, it also became a soul-snatching vessel that could transform and influence its captives. Then, the trapped prisoner starts knocking on the symbols, and we discover we are actually on the back of a giant tortoise. This is the Turtle General, the same one that the deity Xuanwu sent, along with General Snake, to help Wukong battle Yellowbrow in the novel. Cyan Star thinks the prisoner intended to rouse the turtle, but no. Just like Elder Jinshi in Chapter 1, he says it's because he smells the scent of a familiar monkey. She finally notices our presence, and honestly, she's totally speaking like a brainwashed cult member, so we gotta fight her. A couple of things to note about this fight. At one point, she remarks we're as stubborn as stone, which is funny because as we know, Wukong was born from a stone and originally a stone monkey. Second thing is, her hair goes white about halfway through the fight. This is another popular trope in Chinese fantasies where a woman's long black hair completely turns white in a single moment, and it's usually triggered by things like great anger or betrayal or using some evil cultivation methods. Often, when this change happens, they also become more powerful, and in this case, we do see her just letting loose, electrocuting everything, everywhere, all at once. Even so, the Destined One is victorious in the end, and Kangjing Star transforms back into her dragon form to try to escape. We can't have that, so the Destined One jumps aboard. When our fists don't do the trick, we stab our staff into her body and send her crashing through the golden symbols, breaking them apart. I found this to be a bit of an underwhelming way to destroy the symbols because the novel goes into quite a bit of detail about how they were so indestructible, so I didn't expect blunt force trauma to do the trick. But regardless, the next scene immediately makes up for that little niggle when we see a 9-toothed rake fly through the air. This is the signature weapon of none other than former Admiral Tian Peng turned pig, Zhu Bajie. Zhu Bajie is said to be, I think, 11.5 feet tall in the novel, so I was fully expecting a big hulking boar to appear, especially with this close-up of his fearsome face. But then we get a very comical scene. Why is he so small? He is cute though, so I'm not complaining that he's been miniaturized. But this definitely is a deviation from the novel. Bajie also noticeably regards the Destined One, commenting how he looks the same and is another mute. This is yet another one of many instances in the game which indicates we aren't the first monkey to go on this journey for the relics, and we also learn that it was the old monkey from the prologue who asked Bajie to come help us because Yellowbrow is a formidable foe. While I'm very happy that Bajie is free, I am sad that Kangjing Loong died like this. From her Kangjing Star journal entry, we're able to learn more about what happened to her after she attended Yellowbrow's banquet. He knew she wasn't actually there for Maoru Xingguan, but instead wanted more information about Wukong. Yellowbrow pulled her into the sack where she saw Wukong's relic, the 10-tailed goldfish, swimming towards her. The game doesn't reveal exactly what happened next, but when he released her, she became dazed and confused. So I can only speculate here, but based on what we see happen with the Macaque Chief in the sack later, I would guess that he showed her a warped image of Wukong, who was overtaken by bloodlust and had a one-track mind for fighting and killing. And not just Wukong, but also all the Buddhas and the Celestial Realm. Regardless of what she actually saw, she ultimately bows and willingly becomes his disciple. I do wish there could have been a way to free her from Yellowbrow's influence, but instead she became just another discarded chess piece. While Yellowbrow was successfully able to manipulate Kangjing Loong, there's another dragon on the Turtle General's back he couldn't entice over to his side, and this was the Cyan Loong. From his journal entry, we learned that the Cyan Dragon fled to the New West seeking refuge after his father, the Dragon King of the Qing River, was executed for defying an imperial decree to summon a certain amount of rain at a certain designated time, just so he could win a bet against the fortune teller, Yuan Shoucheng, Gourd Grandpa. He thought Yellowbrow's teachings were utter nonsense, but to avoid offending him, the Cyan Dragon said that if he could catch something in the Bitter Lake, that would mean he has the right to remain undisturbed. Yellowbrow knew this was a stalling tactic, but agreed to the proposal with the condition that once the fishing rod was cast, it could not be moved. If he moved, it would prove that the Cyan Dragon had ulterior motives and was deceitful, and so the dragon transformed his sword into a hookless fishing rod and did not move again. This was rather clever of him. The fact that it was a hookless rod indicates that the Cyan Dragon didn't want to catch anything, because that would signify his bond with Yellowbrow's doctrine of utter bliss, which he didn't agree with. It's also possible that Yellowbrow may not have honored their bargain if he did catch a fish, but a hookless rod also allows him to stall and hide in the New West indefinitely. And this is how the Destined One finds him, looking rather fossilized with a layer of snow upon his body, still in his original position from when he first cast the rod. He is also more humanoid looking than the red and black dragons we fought in earlier chapters. Appearing more human is usually a sign of a higher cultivation level and stronger powers, and I would consider this to hold true for all 4 dragon brothers in the game. Upon engaging the Cyan Loong, he is forced to move from his position, which forfeits his deal with Yellowbrow, so unfortunately, it's now kill or be killed. Of course, the Destined One is ultimately victorious, and after we defeat him, we can receive the Mountain-Shaking Claw. In Chinese mythology, the 4 key parts of a dragon are its tail, its bones, its tendons, and its claws. So now we have 3 of the 4 ingredients needed to craft the Golden Long Staff, which is the Fei Long Baozhang that Bodhisattva Lingji used to subdue the Yellow Wind Sage in Journey to the West. Moving forward, we learned that General Turtle was trapped in the Bitter Lake for a long time. The giant reptile ferries us to the North Shore, where Bajie says we'll check on the turtle's friend, General Snake. If you run off when he starts telling you the story about Yellowbrow, he barks at you about how you don't even have the patience to wait for him to finish. But if you pause too long, he's like, we should get moving. There's just a bunch of little touches like this in the game that I really enjoy. Even his idle animations where he's patting his stomach, likely a callback to how he was always hungry in the novel. If you keep running into him, he eventually gets mad and tries to hit you. Plus, he calls himself Soooo in relation to the Destined One, and this means uncle, so we're his nephew. It's also adorable when he scurries after the Destined One to try to catch up to our longer strides, but if we're too far, he just teleports. Soooo 过来! Oh, he's here. I personally feel like Bajie carries the story hella hard. He gets his spotlight in chapter 4, so I will discuss him more in depth in that video, but for now, the way he's characterized in Black Myth is a much more endearing version compared to how he is in the novel, where he's arguably a lot less likable, kind of an imbecile, and also used for comic relief. In Black Myth, though, he's actually quite astute because he'll say things like he's just wondering or posing something as a question, but it turns out to be a very accurate read on what's happening. For example, when he's recounting their run-in with Yellowbrow in Journey to the West, he keenly asks, what are the chances that Milefo appeared just when Wukong was out of options? Yes, awfully convenient, isn't it? Within the context of Black Myth, we should be suspicious, because how is Yellowbrow getting away with all of these same exact antics a second time? He also tells us about what happened before Wukong's alleged death and how he doesn't believe that it was Erlangshen who beat him. If you finish the game, you'll know what happened there. But back to the Snake General, proceeding along the shoreline, the only thing we can find is the skeletal remains of the reptile. Learning of his friend's fate, the turtle sheds a tear, which we can collect to use as a soak to recover mana when using our gourd at full health. From the turtle's journal entry, we learned that after Yellowbrow returned to the New West, General Turtle and General Snake went to fight him once again. They were actually gaining the upper hand too, until Yellowbrow threw an object into the Bitter Lake, which transformed into a 10-tailed goldfish that grew upon contact with the water and entangled the Turtle General. This goldfish was Wukong's relic, which he obtained as a reward for participating in the prologue battle against Sun Wukong, and it's the same golden creature that the Destined One saw swimming beneath the ice earlier in the chapter. Fun fact, goldfish are an invasive species, which is why you should never release them in the wild. While they only grow to a couple inches in a tank, they can grow to be over 10 inches in a pond, so maybe the devs drew inspiration from this. To deal with the Snake General, Yellowbrow released the Opramana bat from the seed sack he stole from his master, Milefo. Yellowbrow then summoned a heavy snowstorm, and because General Snake and General Turtle were reptiles who hibernate in the winter, the Turtle General sank into slumber, while the Snake General was sliced to pieces on the shore. And Yellowbrow commemorates his victory with statues depicting himself disguised as Milefo atop their backs. Unfortunately, the two generals and Cyan Loong aren't the only Wukong allies to be eliminated this chapter. Going back to the Pagoda Realm, Yellowbrow put us here after we defeated Cyan Loong in her dragon form. Not the best place to wake up in, but the first voice we hear is that of the third prince of Flowing Sands, so that makes it all better, at least for me. As mentioned, in the novel, Xiaozhang Taizi was the actual prince of Flowing Sands, and he was a disciple of Bodhisattva Guo Shiwang. The Bodhisattva sent him along with his 4 generals to assist Wukong in fighting Yellowbrow, but they were all captured into the seed sack. However, in Black Myth, the devs combined the kingdom of Sahali and the kingdom of Flowing Sands into one and made him the youngest son of the in-game version of the King of Flowing Sands, who was the small rat king we encountered in Chapter 2. From various dialogue in Chapter 2, like the voices in the hut and certain journal entries, we knew coming into this that when his father, the king, issued the Road and Reverence Edict and executed those who opposed it, the third prince left and went to the New West. But no one could find him after, and now we know why, because he was captured by Yellowbrow again and imprisoned in his Pagoda Realm. Approaching his cell, we can see there is a purple seal locking the doors. The irony is the seal is actually caused by one of his generals, which I'll get to in a bit. The third prince also says our monkey scent is very familiar, but advises us to give up because this place messes with your mind and it's not easy to escape. What's notable in the Chinese dialogue is he says we should be like him, unable to hear and unable to see, simply waiting for the end. However, the Destined One can't be like him because we already obtained Wukong's eyes in Chapter 1 and Wukong's ears in Chapter 2. He's not aware of this, but he unknowingly acknowledges this by saying we are just like him being Sun Wukong. Now, I've heard that some players hated the Pagoda Realm. I completely agree it was certainly frustrating at times, to say the least, especially when I got knocked off the ledges, but I do objectively appreciate the way it's designed because it's like the prince said, it's supposed to mess with our minds and drive us crazy. This area also integrates a lot of real Buddhist motifs, but twists them a bit, so it's storytelling through environment. Taking a look around, the first thing many of us must have noticed is this giant spinning structure in the center. This is called a mani wheel, also known as prayer wheels in Buddhism, and they are specifically turned clockwise to help cultivate good karma and purify bad karma. But here, we see one of the sections of the wheel rotates counterclockwise. As far as I know, this is not typically done, so to me it's signaling that Yellowbrow's doctrines are very much counter to what real Buddhism preaches. It's also exponentially bigger and longer than real-life mani wheels, so this also suggests to me that Yellowbrow is perhaps compensating for something. But what's odd about the mani wheel is every so often it plays a beguiling chant that drives everyone mad. Even the Destined One is not immune, as our eyes glow red and we gradually lose half our health bar during these phases. During these times, some creepy lantern wardens appear. These were originally craftsmen who cut down ancient trees to rebuild the temple that had fallen into disrepair. But after the work was done, Yellowbrow turned them into these vine-like guai. Another cool detail in the Pagoda Realm is the hanging coffins along the walls. These exist in real life in multiple locations in China. This is a funerary process that's often attributed to the Bo people of China, an ethnic minority who unfortunately no longer exists today. So the exact reason for why the coffins are arranged this way on the face of a cliff remains unknown, but it's speculated that it was either to ensure the dead were not disturbed or to place them in the sky so they can be closer to heaven. I also want to note that there are many yakshas here in the Pagoda Realm. Yakshas are mythological creatures that are typically depicted as demons and supernatural beings, so they tend to take on more adversarial roles in Chinese literature. From the journal entries in Black Myth, we learn that the Yaksha king was betrayed by the celestial beings, leading to the massacre of the royal family and the downfall of the Yaksha kingdom. After the kingdom's collapse, the Yakshas were forced into exile, and sadly, many of them appear to have ended up in the Pagoda Realm. This is actually planting the seed for what we'll discover in Chapter 5, so more on that in a future video. By now, most of us are likely aware that the original squad from Journey to the West consisted of 1 master and 4 disciples. In this chapter of the game, we'll get to encounter 2 additional groups of 5, which I would say are used as a foil to compare and contrast against the original group of protagonists. The first set is the 3rd Prince's squad. In the English translation, all 4 are called captains. However, in the Chinese version of the game, they are called mojiang, which can be translated to devil or demon general. If you watch my prologue video, you'll know the English translation of Black Myth uses the term 妖怪 or 怪 as a very general overall term to refer to creatures with some level of cultivation or powers. In Chinese, there are different terms and more specific categories than that. 妖怪 can be good or bad, but mo usually means they are evil, with an asterisk. The asterisk is because the word mo has some Buddhist origins, so the implied connotation here is a mo is someone who has some level of cultivation or powers, but succumbed to the vices that Buddhism preaches against, such as losing yourself in your desires or some other type of corruption. So just from their titles alone, we can tell that they are unfortunately beyond saving. The first captain I encountered was Captain Lotus Vision, who can be found in the bowels of the Pagoda Realm. Notice how the pagodas on the ceiling are upside down? In Chinese mythology, pagodas are symbolic of Buddhism. It's arguably one of the default structures in many temples, but in Black Myth, the Pagoda Realm is a prison and a place of torment. Though I take the flipped positioning of the pagoda as yet another symbolic cue that everything here is a twisted version of real Buddhism. From the journal, we learned that Yellowbrow pierced Captain Lotus Vision's body with his spike shaft cudgel, causing eyes to grow out of every hole. I'm assuming the swirly things are meant to be the eyes, but this guai's overall design seems to be based on one of the 24 Deva statues that are at the Gaoping Iron Buddha Temple. The collar, the pose, and pattern on the robes are very comparable to the statue for Puti Shushen, the Bodhi tree god in particular. After defeating Captain Lotus Vision, all the purple seals will be removed from the prison cells, and I can finally get closer to my husband, the 3rd prince. We can finally see how handsome he is up close. We can finally kick down the door. Hi-ya! He immediately realizes that we've defeated one of his captains and asks us to slay them all in order to free their corrupted souls. And then we learn how they all ended up in this sorry state. Yellowbrow posed as Milefo and tricked them into attending a banquet, which led to their capture, similar to what happened to Cyan Loong. The 3rd prince also blinded his eyes and deafened his ears to protect himself from the beguiling chants that corrupted his captains. But most importantly, his dialogue tells us what Yellowbrow's obsession really is.
黄梅得了大圣根器，野心大过往日，顾盼自兄得意忘形，你或有可乘之机。
As a refresher, in Buddhism, desires are formed through our senses, so I do think it makes sense that having one of Wukong's relics amplifies certain proclivities we already have. For example, the Black Bear in Chapter 1 didn't know how to harness the eye relic, but he still used it to obtain offerings from lesser guai, feeding his greed. The Yellowwind Sage in Chapter 2 used the ear relic by channeling it through Bodhisattva Lingji's head, and he became obsessed with cultivating it to become stronger because he wanted Yao Guai to live dignified and righteous lives, and he needed greater strength to protect them. And now, in Chapter 3, based on the 3rd prince's dialogue, Wukong's relic has amplified Yellowbrow's obsession as well, his ego. Now this next line he says is directly from the novel.
不拿风收水怪，群龙伏虎镇山场。
When little Prince Zhang and his 4 captains fought Yellowbrow the first time in Journey to the West, Yellowbrow had laughed at him, saying, "What kind of skills does a child like you have that you dare to come here?" The prince answered with a poem about his background and accomplishments, and this is one of the lines from that poem where he says he subdued water guai, dragons, and tigers. This depressed and defeated 3rd prince we see here is nothing like how he was in the novel. His journal entry even says he was renowned renowned as a prince of might well known, but now he muses that he can save no one. I don't want him to wallow like this, so off we go to fight the remaining captains. The next one we can encounter is Captain Wise Voice, who is in a chamber at the very top of the Pagoda Realm and the source of the beguiling chants. I do have to point out here that part of Yellowbrow's teachings, as we'll hear later in the chapter, preaches carnal indulgences. While there's nothing overtly explicit in Journey to the West, scholars have interpreted Yellowbrow's story to have some suggestive symbolism, given the mace he uses and the seed sack. Similarly, there is some imagery here in Black Myth that could be suggestive, but I'll leave that up to you. Main thing is, upon defeating him, the hell phase will no longer happen. Yay! For the two remaining captains, we can find Captain Void Illusion in the Valley of Ecstasy, but strangely, he's already dead. It looks like a bunch of roots and branches are growing out of him. From the journal, we learned that Yellowbrow broke this captain's limbs and reattached them with those of others. But in the ending tapestry, it appears his original form was that of a bat, so I think these panels in the snow here may have been his wings. It is also interesting that his body is before a giant statue of Kang Loong, modeled after the same one that's in the Jade Emperor Temple. Perhaps this is suggesting Kang Loong had a hand in his death. The final captain is Captain Kalpa Wave, who can be found in the Valley of Ecstasy at the temple's gate. From the journal, we learn that Yellowbrow had twisted off this captain's head and transformed the blood and pus that erupted into a lotus flower. From the ending painting, we do see him on the left of Xiaozhang Taizi. This depicts the original encounter with Yellowbrow in Journey to the West, but he doesn't have a head here either. These may look like eyes, but I'm pretty sure they're his chest. So I'm not sure if this is an intended discrepancy or if I'm missing something here, but red lotuses do hold some symbolic meanings in Buddhism. They represent compassion and the original nature of the heart. Ironic because clearly Yellowbrow has no compassion at all. If we defeat all four captains, we can then return to the third prince in his prison cell in the Pagoda Realm and deliver their spirits. As mentioned, Xiaozhang Taizi's weapon was the Chubai spear in the original novel, but when he gives it to us, it's just the spearhead. I'm guessing it was broken in his fight against Yellowbrow, but we can recraft it for ourselves. Also, to the right of the cell is the two-headed rat from chapter 2, who was once a human but was turned into a rodent, Guai. Pulling the blade out of his chest, the prince hits us with an illuminating line. The English has this as another master plan of Mount Lingshan. In the Chinese dialogue, he's basically saying that this was all malice or malicious intent created by Lingshan. Lingshan is where Buddha resides, so here it's used as a collective term to refer to the Buddhist deities and figures who are in power. The prince is basically saying that they orchestrated this whole thing, but it also reinforces our suspicions from previous chapters of the game that certain Buddhist figures purposely allowed terrible things to happen to further their own interests. So at the very least, if nothing else, we can safely deduce from the prince's dialogue that we should be suspicious of Lingshan's motives. But for now, this wraps up the first group of 5. The second group of 5 is Yellowbrow and his 4 disciples. For some background, Tang Sanzang's disciples followed a naming scheme where their name had the character Wu, which means awaken. Yellowbrow's disciples follow a similar format, except their names all begin with the character Bu, which means not. The first one I ran into was non-white, Wu Bai. He awaits us at Mindfulness Cliff, but in order to reach this area, we first must reveal the path to enter. Upon reaching the pavilion at the base of the mountain, we can encounter baby Buddha once again. He's wearing blue, so we know this is the real Mila Fu. He tells us that he's looking at a big Buddha statue, but we can't see it because we don't have Buddha in our hearts. To change this, we have to bow to 4 Buddha statues in the vicinity, but Bajie is still convinced that baby Buddha is up to some tricks and makes another astute guess that Yellowbrow must have disguised himself to fool people yet again.
你莫不是那老贼变的，专来作弄人嘞？
He does mistakenly accuse the wrong baby Buddha of that, but Mila just says,
不拜就不拜。
不拜就不拜. If you don't want to bow, then don't. I think this is a reference to what Yellowbrow said to the traveling band in the novel, which is 见如来怎么不拜. This stuck out to me because the real Milafo's statement is much more in line with real Buddhism in that they don't intend to force people into worship or submission, whereas someone like Yellowbrow and Bodhisattva Lingqi from chapter 2 expects others to submit as befitting their lower station. We also finally see the giant Buddha appear, and I believe this is the Ruiye Mila statue that's located in Fujian province. This is the largest Milafo statue in China as far as I'm aware, but its orientation is flipped in-game like a mirror image. I may be reading too much into this, but this could be alluding to how Yellowbrow is trying to copy Milafo and take his place. Making our way up to the entry, we can see the characters for Jianchafang, which can be translated to Inspection District. This also exists in real life as a wooden archway to a street that's part of an ancient building complex near the town of Fencheng, located in Shanxi province. It was originally a fiefdom during the Tang Dynasty, and today it's known as one of the 10 ancient building complexes in Shanxi. There's also another wooden archway at the end of this street called Yizhenfang. The meaning of the characters can be translated to support district, but combining the two archways together, it can be translated to observing and protecting the morality of the world. Once we go in, we are soon greeted by Non-White. Upon seeing him, the first thing you may have noticed is his white face paint. Actually, I should say the first thing I noticed is he's absolutely unhinged, but then I registered the white face paint. This, coupled with his name, clearly indicates that he is Yellowbrow's counterpart to Bailong Ma, which literally translates to White Dragon Horse. In the novel, Bailong Ma was originally the third prince of the Dragon King of the West. However, he committed a very serious offense by destroying a valuable pearl that the Jade Emperor gifted to his father, so the Jade Emperor condemned him to death. Guan Yin intervened and suggested offering him a path to redemption by serving as a steed for the Tang monk on his journey, which he accepted. While he doesn't have as prominent of a role compared to the other disciples in the group, he does represent humility and the journey of transformation. Despite coming from royalty and possessing great powers, he humbles himself to serve as a simple horse to atone for his mistake. Non-White, however, does not share this same symbolism. From his journal entry, we learn that he was originally an actor in a small opera troupe who specialized in playing the jester and always painted his face white. This is interesting because of its parallels with traditional Chinese opera formats. Some of you may be familiar with the Beijing Opera, which is a traditional Chinese performing art that combines music, dance, acrobatics, and more to tell stories from Chinese folklore and literature. In Beijing Opera, there are 4 main role types. The first 2 are Sheng, the male roles, and Dan, the female roles, which were also traditionally performed by men before the 20th century. The third is Chou, which is the clown role, often easily identified by their white nose makeup. Non-White used to always play the jester. The fourth role type is Jing, which are painted face roles, and these are often reserved for bold and intense characters, so think generals or warriors. To further distinguish these different roles, Beijing Opera uses very elaborate and colorful face paint patterns and designs called lianpu for the Chou and Jing roles to convey a character's personalities, qualities, and moral alignments. Each color has specific meanings. For example, red means loyalty, bravery, and righteousness. Black means integrity and strong will, and white indicates cunning, villainy, treachery, and even cruelty. In fact, one of the most famous Beijing opera characters who uses white face paint is Cao Cao, a prominent warlord from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which, like Journey to the West, is one of the 4 great classical novels of Chinese literature. His character is usually portrayed with a white face to indicate his scheming and ambitious nature, as well as his reputation for being manipulative. All this to say, before we even get into more details about Non-White's backstory, his character design is already providing a clear visual cue. To be honest, I still felt bad for him because his journal states that no matter how hard he worked, he was always ridiculed and never given the lead role of the hero. That empathy did disappear after learning that he beat up the hero on stage, which angered the audience and caused the troupe to expel him from the group. The jester couldn't figure out why this happened, but out of all things, he somehow concluded that the problem must have been his appearance. So he killed the hero actor, peeled off his face, and wore it on stage in his place. The audience thought he had gone mad, so they tied him up and sent him to a temple for seclusion. The abbot of the temple, likely Non-Void, whom we'll meet later, named him Non-White and told him that a destined one would come and he could become a true hero if he could wear his face. This is why when we first meet him, he says he'll peel our face off and go play as the destined one. But of course, the destined one prevails. Moving on, another one of Yellowbrow's disciples is called Non-Able, 不能. He is the counterpart to 猪八戒, who has another name given by Bodhisattva Guan Yin called 不能, awakened to ability. He was originally the marshal or admiral of the heavenly canopy, who commanded a vast navy of celestial warriors. However, he was banished from heaven due to his lustful nature when he made unwanted advances towards Chang'e, the moon goddess, which was a grave offense. For his misconduct, he was punished by the Jade Emperor and sent down to Earth, where he was reincarnated as a half-man, half-pig creature with a lot of vices, including lust, laziness, gluttony, greed, and selfishness. Unlike Sun Wukong, who symbolizes the mind, 猪八戒 embodies the physical and earthly desires that tie people to the material world. His vices are obstacles to spiritual enlightenment, and through the pilgrimage, he gradually learns to control these urges. Conversely, Non-Able doesn't seem to struggle with any of these problems. He was a highly accomplished martial artist, but Yellowbrow still wanted to teach him some skills. Non-Able declined and said, "If I use methods I do not believe in to achieve victory, even if I win in the end, I will still feel like I did not win the fight." He also tells Yellowbrow that because he has always taken the clever route, it is difficult for him to attain Buddhahood. This, I believe, is alluding to the ending animation, which shows Yellowbrow taking pretty extreme actions to win, as opposed to simply living the way Buddhism preaches. Non-Able is so savage because he even flat out says to Yellowbrow, "It seems you can do everything, but in reality, you can do nothing." He's also notable because he's the only one out of the four who didn't fully submit to Yellowbrow. The next disciple is Non-Pure, Wu Jing, and he is the counterpart to Sha Wu Jing. For context, Sandy was originally the curtain-lifting general who served in the Jade Emperor's court. However, he was banished from heaven after accidentally breaking a valuable crystal goblet. As punishment, he was exiled to the mortal realms, where he was transformed into a fearsome river guai. He terrorized travelers near the river, devouring those who tried to cross, until Bodhisattva Guan Yin came to recruit him for Tang Sanzang's pilgrimage. Grateful for the chance at redemption, he willingly became a disciple, adopting the name Sha Wu Jing, which means awakened to purity. Unlike Sun Wukong, who was rebellious, and 猪八戒, who was often lazy, Sha Wu Jing was calm and often the quiet workhorse of the group, taking on tasks without complaint. He was responsible for carrying the group's heavy luggage and supplies, showing his strength and willingness to bear burdens. Conversely, Bu Jing means not pure. He was someone who constantly sought to shirk his duties and laze about. When you fight him, he also kind of just stands there for a very long time, not exerting any effort. I'm assuming this was intentional due to his sloth-like nature. Last but not least is Non-Void, Wukong. Given his name and his station as the temple's abbot and highest-ranking disciple, he is the counterpart to Sun Wukong. Kong is commonly translated to void or emptiness and refers to a central Buddhist concept that everything is impermanent. So Wukong's name is often translated as awakened to emptiness. With non-void, his name means not empty, which we can take as a very direct indication that he is definitely not enlightened. Why? Well, first, he follows Yellowbrow and his doctrines are counter to what real Buddhism preaches, but it's also because of the karma he sowed when he took an innocent life one winter's night. Upon reaching the Forest of Felicity, we see a familiar white fox pelt draped around the neck of a petrified monk. Approaching near, we hear a voice asking us to please listen to her story. This is the very same fox we saw in the ending animation of Chapter 2.
谁料那日出门觅食，中了猎户埋下的陷阱。朦胧中，见一书生前来将我救下，带回家中养伤。我动弹不得，心中却满是感激。原想待身体康健，便助他求取功名，以报救命之恩。没成想，那书生南柯一梦。 梦醒后，将我残杀，留下孤魂不散。
Her soul was unable to move on after she was wrongfully murdered by the scholar, and she tells us that she learned he had become a monk in the new Thunderclap Temple. So she implores the Destined One to take her form and lead her to him so that she may finally confront her killer. In Chinese mythology, there's a specific name for female fox guai called hulijing. While it literally translates to fox spirit, these hulijing usually take the form of very beautiful young women. They're often presented as an enchantress or seductress, using their beauty and charm to interact with human men. So people typically don't trust fox spirits and tend to be more wary of them. In fact, the phrase hulijing is even used today to describe a woman who seduces men. This fox longed to become a fox immortal, and in order to do so, she was told she had to pass a rigorous examination conducted by the Lady of Mount Tai. This lady is also known as 陛下元君 or 泰山娘娘, and she is actually a goddess in Taoism who is said to command fox spirits in Chinese folklore. In Black myth, we are told that this deity only approves of certain cultivation methods. Foxes can seduce and consume humans to cultivate. These methods are considered bad because not only do they harm others, but they're seen as a shortcut. This fox clearly understood that and was committed to discipline, only relying on the essence of the sun and moon for cultivation. Unfortunately, one day she accidentally stepped onto a hunter's trap and was rescued by a young scholar, and we know what happens after. Another element at play here is the concept of 救命之恩, which literally translates to the grace of saving one's life. The fox spirit actually uses this exact phrase in the Chinese dialogue when she recounts her story to the Destined One. This is significant because this is yet another very popular trope in a lot of Chinese fantasies where characters express very deep gratitude to someone who has saved or spared their life. It often implies it's a debt that can never be fully repaid, and often the character who was saved devotes their entire life to serving or supporting their benefactor. In other words, this fox spirit was truly grateful to the scholar and would never have hurt him, despite his nightmare convincing him otherwise. We take her to the scholar, and what a reunion it is. Turns out the scholar and non-void are one and the same.
你是人是鬼？这么多年，我日日为你诵经，可你还是要索我性命吗？你又岂会知我动手时是何等心痛？你既愿赌未消，我佛慈悲，便再超度你一回。
This fight pissed me off so much because this punk had the audacity to mock the fox spirit's love for him. Obviously, we had to whoop his butt. I did think it was interesting that he had the ability to become kong or empty like mist, so we couldn't physically hit him because spiritually he is not kong at all. The arena is also quite a sight to behold. I believe this is the Qianshou Guanyin, the thousand-hand Guanyin statue, located at the famed Dazu rock carvings in Chongqing province. The reason why she has 1,000 hands is because she's known as the Bodhisattva of mercy, so all of these hands extend out to protect people from suffering. In Journey to the West, Guanyin came to the group's rescue on multiple occasions, but she was the one who gave Tang Senzang the tightening circlet that would subdue Wukong as well. I also explained her role with the Kasaya of Eversparks and the Black Bear more in depth in my chapter 1 video, and again, we can't know for sure if she had any ill intent, but if we opt for a darker interpretation, these hands can also represent her manipulation of events, or having a hand in everything, directing things from the background to ensure a specific outcome. His portrait also details a very interesting debate he had with Non-Able about whether or not killing is a sin. His responses are partially true for Buddhism, but as the debate goes on, he seems to warp them a bit. For example, yes, killing is a sin, and yes, understanding emptiness leads to enlightenment. But no, killing for the greater good is not ethical in Buddhism, because the religion believes in non-violence and that all sentient living beings have the right to life. Killing, no matter the intention, is viewed as a failure to show compassion. Non-Able here is absolutely right in saying that killing creates negative karma and that this karmic consequence could outweigh any perceived good that might come from killing. Non-Void says if he doesn't go to hell, who will? That to me shows the lengths to which he's willing to go in order to justify his actions. I personally interpret this to mean, well, if he wasn't the one to kill the fox, other people would have landed in hell instead. He's doing a good thing by taking the burden of killing away from someone else. But Non-Able calls him out so well, saying that the pretense behind justifying the killing is the real sin. And this renders Non-Void speechless, because he used his nightmare as justification for killing the fox. He fell short of Buddhist teachings, and there is no justifying that. Case in point, after this discussion, the two never debated again. But when we fight him, this amoeba still had things to say, even with his dying breath. He says that y'all will always be y'all. This ties back to what Bodhisattva Lingji said to Sun Wukong in chapter 2, that everyone has their place. What he's implying is y'all will always be an inferior species and have an evil nature. When we return to the fox, she calls Non-Void out for this.
世人总说人妖殊途，再见到他，我才知道，怕妖的人比妖更可怕。
Those who fear y'all are more scary than what they fear. I think both of these characters' final lines illustrate the dichotomy of this central theme in Black myth very well. One side preaching that all living beings have a set nature and root station from birth they should not challenge, like Fox Guai, who must not be able to resist betraying the men that they prey upon. The other striving to change their destinies and preordained fates, like a fox spirit moved by gratitude, intending to repay a life debt for the rest of her days. Or perhaps even a monkey who only wants freedom. In any case, I hope this fox spirit was able to find peace at last. Aside from this squad of 4 disciples, Yellowbrow was also able to attract and manipulate many others into following him. For example, all these petrified corpses were once hopeful disciples. Upon arriving at the temple, they were able to pick out a Kasaya, but they were all super thin and provided no warmth against the bitter cold. Non-Void tricked each one by saying they alone were different from all the others, that they had the potential to comprehend Buddha's wisdom, which would protect them from the cold. Even Ma Tianba, who was trying to find help for his master the Bull King, was influenced by Yellowbrow and says that peace is living for yourself. One other notable character he was able to draw to his side is the Macaque Chief. We first run into him at the beginning of chapter 3 when he uses a peach to knock one of the frozen monks awake to attack us. In Chinese, the Macaque Chief is a character in Journey to the West called Shi Kao Ma Hou, the red-buttocked baboon. In Chapter 3 of the novel, there were 4 specific older monkeys on Flower Fruit Mountain, Sun Wukong's birthplace. 2 of them were red-buttocked baboons, and the remaining 2 were Tongbei Yuanhou, which is translated to gibbons, which are a type of smaller ape. Wukong was always very defensive of his monkeys, so one day he said they needed weapons to protect themselves, and it was these 4 older monkeys who suggested he obtain them from the kingdom of Aolai. Wukong summoned a great wind to sweep through Aolai, causing the prince of the kingdom to flee in terror and everyone else to stay inside their homes, so he was able to use his clones to raid their armory and bring back a bunch of weapons. Why is this relevant? Well, Wukong wasn't happy with the sword he got, and the 4 older monkeys appear again, this time telling him to go find the Dragon Palace of the Eastern Sea. This is where Wukong finds the Dragon King of the East, Guang, and obtains his full armor set and weapon, the Ruyi Jinggu Bang, which was originally a pillar that stabilized and measured the depths of the seas. With this success, upon his return, he names the 4 old monkeys as his generals and entrusted them with formal affairs. This is what allowed him to then roam free and acquire a circle of 6 sworn brothers, one of whom is the Bull King we'll meet in Chapter 5. We don't hear about the red butt baboon until much later in the novel, in Chapter 58, where the current Buddha, Rulai Fo, explains that there are 5 kinds of immortals and 5 kinds of creatures, but 4 kinds of monkeys which do not belong to any of the aforementioned categories, so they're special. These 4 include the stone monkey, which is what Wukong is, the red-buttocked baboon, which is what the Macaque Chief is, the gibbon, and the 6-eared macaque, which only briefly appears in an animation in a later chapter. So the question now is, if the Macaque Chief is a subordinate of Wukong, why is he so aggressive towards the Destined One? According to his portrait entry, after Wukong's death, the Macaque Chief encountered a lot of hardships. He went from someone who was special and respected and had a high station to now a pitiful creature who struggled in life. Therefore, Yellowbrow was able to use this to his advantage and tempt him to his side with the promise of power. I must say I was both entertained and appalled when fighting him because he has this pooping attack. I kept my distance. After whacking him for a bit, he bows in a fake show of surrender before disappearing with a laugh. We can then run into him a second time after reaching the warding temple, and Gourd Grandpa is there as well. He's just chilling inside the protective circle until we beat up the Macaque Chief enough that he disappears again. Only then can we enter the Ring of Fire, and Gourd Grandpa teaches us this very skill. This is likely a callback to the protective circle that Sun Wukong would draw around his master in Journey to the West. He would say, as long as you don't leave this circle, you'll be safe. But the monk didn't always listen. We don't fight the Macaque Chief again until we battle Yellowbrow, but before we do that, it's important to mention that the Destined One has some allies and supportive characters on his side as well. In the north shore of Bitter Lake, we can encounter Cyan Loong, an overly dramatic dragon who keeps quipping about his old age and how young we are. I personally find this character very cute and endearing. One cool thing to note about his character design is he carries a Ruyi jade scepter. Originally, I believe these items were used as back scratchers before they evolved to become a more esteemed symbol. You may recall the keeper from Chapter 1 was also holding a back scratcher, only a more modern looking version. It is a very common tool for older Chinese grandpas to use, so it's fitting for Cyan Loong. Of note, the head of the scepter is shaped like a lingzhi fungus, which is a type of mushroom that's been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years and said to represent longevity. So kind of on the nose that he's constantly talking about age. After defeating him, he starts wailing and throwing a tantrum, saying that we're picking on him. He insists that he can barely move a muscle and needs an elixir pill from Shugo, so we go get one. After delivering the special-made bone-strengthening pellet to Cyan Loong, he tosses it away, but now has the strength to unseal the Zodiac village in the Painted Realm.
这画中圣境，乃是我等合力打造的世外桃源。猴子既归位，6丁6甲也当重聚了。哈哈哈哈哈哈！
Upon entering the Zodiac village using the Ruyi scroll, we can see that all of the Zodiacs we've met before, including Chen Long, Xu Go, and Sheng Ho, are now conveniently gathered in one central location. We also meet a new Zodiac character called the Yin Tiger. If we challenge him to a duel and lose, he'll compare us to Sun Wukong, saying that we still fall short of him. But if we're victorious, I believe he is the only opponent we face that the Destined One honors with a salute. This gesture is called 抱拳礼, fist covering greeting. This was originally a Confucian greeting, but it's also been used as a sign to show that you weren't carrying any weapons. It's since evolved to be pretty commonly used in martial arts as a way to show discipline and respect. Especially since Yin Tiger is the weaponsmith and armorsmith of the group, and the only Zodiac we can duel repeatedly, I thought this was a very fitting detail that the devs added. In the storyline of the game, we learned that they were cast down from heaven due to the fact that they were allies of Wukong. In Journey to the West, these characters are actually part of the 六丁玉女 and 六甲将军. This can be shortened to the 6 Ding and 6 Jia mentioned in the novel, whom Wukong had called upon to help when he was stuck in the golden symbols. According to Taoism, the 6 Ding are the 6 jade maidens who are the yin deities, while the 6 Jia are the 6 male generals or yang deities, and they were said to be able to ward off disasters and have powers over wind and thunder. Here's where it gets a little complicated. Technically, this group is supposed to be separate from the 12 Yuancheng, which are the 12 deities that are associated with the 12 Chinese zodiacs. Chinese astrologers would use a system called the 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches to record the calendar, which operates on a 60-year cycle. The 10 heavenly stems are characters that represent the 5 Chinese elements and yin-yang energy, and the 12 earthly branches are associated with the zodiac animals, each representing their own time of day, direction, seasons, and other symbolic meanings. The heavenly stems and the earthly branches play a major role in calculating 八字, the 4 pillars of destiny. Each pillar is a combination of a stem and a branch, so when calculated correctly, it's supposed to form a complete picture of someone's personality, strengths, and life path. So in Black Myth, it appears the devs may have combined these two systems because the characters explicitly call themselves the 六丁六甲 in the Chinese dialogue, but the English calls them the Zodiac Deities, which we know through Chinese astrology is technically a different system. And in Yin Tiger's journal entry, it specifically states he was in Yuanchen Hall. This is just speculation on my part, but I think they may have been combined like this simply because the Chinese zodiac is a lot more well known and easier to comprehend. And there has been other crossovers of the two throughout history. Currently, we only get to meet 4 of the Zodiacs in Black Myth. However, I count 10 in the ending tapestry, even though there's supposed to be 12 in total. It's easy to see which ones are the Yin Tiger and Chen Long, but the rest we can deduce based on the Zodiac animal on their crowns. Aside from our Zodiac allies though, there are also figures working behind the scenes to seemingly assist the Destined One. At the Bitter Lake, we can encounter an alleged treasure hunter who is surrounded by Opramana bats and appears to be in need of rescuing. Note Bajie once again makes an astute observation that the New West is full of liars. We really ought to heed his words. After dispatching of the Yao Guai, the man speaks of a riddle. What is green and round on the outside and red and sweet on the inside? A watermelon. The second time we meet him is at the Towers of Karma, where he appears to be freezing to death. After using our Ring of Fire skill to warm him up, he reveals he's looking for some watermelons of longevity and tells us that a chubby kid was seen jumping off a cliff holding one of these fruits. So the Destined One jumps off the cliff in question and we reach an empty arena, only to be greeted by the treasure hunter once again. Only he's not really a treasure hunter, but the green-capped martialist. Just like the white-clad noble in Chapter 1 and the yellow-robed squire in Chapter 2, the green-capped martialist also mentions an older brother. We know who that is. From his journal entry, we learn of a conversation he had with a young monk in the watermelon field. From the context, we can safely deduce that this figure is the real Milefo that he was speaking to. The martialist intended to test the Destined One on his brother's behalf, and there's a couple of illuminating points here. First, the young monk says he worries for the martialist's brother because of that thing he's guarding. While the entry doesn't explicitly state what this thing is, we can deduce it's also one of Wukong's relics, because the monk says that thing tests the bearer's heart greatly. Strong relics require great power to handle. If you don't have the ability, like the Black Bear in Chapter 1, you either will not be able to harness it at all, or it can corrupt you, like what we saw happen with the Yellow Wind Sage in Chapter 2. The elder brother in question is very strong. With him, it's not so much a matter of base power, but due to the length of time in which he's been guarding the relic, to the tune of 500 years, the concern is if he'll be able to continue to hold out against its influences. Second, the martialist says, if this time that monkey succeeds, wouldn't it be best for the both of you? This provides another indication that this isn't the first time the Destined One has gone on this journey for the relics, and that both the elder brother and this young monk have a vested interest in the monkey succeeding. I find it notable that the monk doesn't answer, so I actually interpret this to mean Milefo isn't exactly an ally out of the goodness of his heart. I would personally classify him as more of a neutral character. This is because we have to keep in mind that Milefo is destined to become the Buddha of the future. No matter what happens, that is the eventual prescribed outcome. It just so happens that his goals seem to align more with the Destined One. Lastly, he also tells the martialist to go pass his disciple's test. We know this disciple is Yellowbrow. Milefo, being as powerful as he is, can easily stop him anytime he wants. So the implication of this line in the journal is Milefo is fully aware of everything Yellowbrow is doing in Blackman's storyline and has allowed it. The fight with the martialist also imparts an important lesson. Kindness is useless if you don't have wisdom. I think this may be a callback to the relationship between Tang Sanzang and Wukong, because the monk strictly adhered to nonviolence and as such was often gullible. He was constantly being tricked by Yao Guai and not trusting Wukong, who could see through their schemes. So the martialist is not wrong when he says we can't be the Destined One if we are so easily tricked, because Wukong would have never been so gullible. But we do learn, and after besting him, the scene changes to reveal the watermelon field and a laughing Milefo. He tells us about the time Wukong changed himself into a watermelon to subdue Yellowbrow, and while he looks super cute like a child here, make no mistake, he is very powerful. He tells the Destined One to come closer, and when we don't immediately move, he yanks us over in a sudden display of force. He then decides to teach us a spell unknown to both Wukong and Yellowbrow.
啥？
This is the Chinese character for Jing, which can be translated to prohibit or restrict. As such, this spellbinder skill prevents us from using spells, but increases the effectiveness of our physical attacks. If this character sounds familiar, it's because this is the same character that Milefo wrote on Wukong's hand in Journey to the West, which placed Yellowbrow under a spell. In the novel, he used his saliva, but in Black Myth, he used watermelon juice, which I would say is preferable. This is also the same Jing as in the Jinggu, the prohibitive band that Guan Yin placed on the Black Bear from Chapter 1. Milefo also tells us about one of Wukong's old friends. From his journal entry, we learned that this old friend was Erlang Shen, who sought help from Milefo after Wukong's alleged death. What's interesting is, Erlang says the Celestial Court won't be able to find him inside the mural, but he asks if Lingshan will know that Milefo helped him. This illustrates two things. First, this reaffirms that the Immortals of Heaven and the Buddhas of Lingshan are technically rivals. They can work together against common enemies, but they are not the same, because they have fundamentally different beliefs and end goals. Second, Milefo is doing his own thing. He's not following Lingshan, which is still under the rule of Rulai-Fo. Since he is fated to become the Buddha of the future, perhaps he's making subtle moves to bring about the revolution that would lead to his eventual ascent. I also think it's funny that he doesn't give Erlangshen a straight answer to his question and just alludes to how handsome he is. Erlangshen is said to be very good looking in Chinese mythology. Nice little nod to his lore. I still prefer the third prince though. While we can discover the Great Pagoda Milefo mentions in this chapter, we can't unlock all of its secrets just yet. What we can see for now is there are 7 panels on the walls, and 2 of them depict the ending murals from Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. We'll need to get through all of the game's chapters and unlock more paintings first, so it's time to face Yellowbrow. Upon entering the new Thunderclap Temple's Mahavira Hall, which is just what the main hall of a Buddhist temple is called, we finally encounter Yellowbrow once again. In a notable deviation from the original novel, Black Myth gives us some new backstory for this character, where he has more of a history with Jing Chanzi, who was the Tang monk's original identity as the second disciple of Buddha. From this conversation, we learned that Yellowbrow and Jing Chanzi held 2 different perspectives. The latter believed that those on Lingshan were not inherently superior to others, but Yellowbrow insisted that those beneath them could never measure up to their level. I feel that the visuals of this scene are pretty poignant because he's moving the pieces about like pawns on a chessboard, but he physically looks like a child playing with a toy set. It's a great reflection of his character because he wants to puff himself up to be powerful and above the rest, but he himself came from very small and very humble beginnings. Side note, the design of this shrine is based on the actual Xiaoxitian Shrine, the Little Western Paradise, a Buddhist monastery which was founded in the Ming Dynasty in Shanxi province. It's renowned for its suspended sculptures and features really beautiful and intricate architecture. So the mistake that Jing Chanzi made was to fall asleep during one of Buddha's sermons. This was seen as a sign of disrespect. So as punishment, he was forced to reincarnate in the mortal realms 10 times as a means to redeem himself through hardship, humility, and spiritual growth. His 10th reincarnation was that of the Tang monk, Tang Sanzang. And from this dialogue, we learn that after Wukong's alleged death, his other disciples ran away, while he took to the shadows. So Yellowbrow's takeaway from all this is, it's all nonsense. Their journey changed absolutely nothing, so why believe in Buddha? He declares he would rather believe in himself, and finally drops the facade.
什么狗屁如来，不如我自己来。
为何不败？
Note this line is slightly different from what he says in Journey to the West. As mentioned in the novel, he says, 见如来怎么不拜? You see Rulai Buddha, why don't you bow? In the game, he says, 见未来为何不拜? Which means, you see the future, why don't you bow? He swapped 如来 with 未来, so in this context, he's still referring to himself as Milefo because he is the Buddha of the future. Immediately, we can see he is holding the spike shaft cudgel, which was originally the stick that was used to hit the chime, and the seed sack, which he stole from Milefo in the original novel and has somehow successfully stolen again. Sus. Also, his robes, his stature, even the way he raises his arms as if he's receiving cheers from an adoring crowd is all very over the top and larger than life. I just see this as more ways in which he's trying to compensate for his ego, really. After beating his first phase, he puts the sack to use and pulls the Destined One right in.
本作这大宝正是为迷途之人准备，你且进去，误上一误。
At last, we're reunited with Bajie, who tells us that Yellowbrow used one of Wukong's relics and wove its strength into the sack, making it stronger than before. As we join him in the fight against the Macaque Chief, Yellowbrow recounts Buddha's teachings that all beings suffer because they indulge and do not heed the precepts, which are ethical guidelines that form the foundation of Buddhist morality. But Yellowbrow thinks this is all nonsense, so he came up with his own doctrine. He's basically preaching indulgence and seeking your own bliss. As we're about to land the killing blow on the Macaque Chief, Yellowbrow uses the sack's powers to remake the Destined One into the macaque, to amplify our thirst for blood and reduce us to a monkey bent on killing.
对，就是这样，这才是你。小侄子，撑住，莫丢了神智！哈哈哈哈哈哈！来，我让你杀得更畅快些。
He drops us onto the shrine, and after making our way through the horde, Yellowbrow finally meets us for a one-on-one again, and wow, he talks so much and in such a self-aggrandizing way. He's saying stuff like, "Behold my Mahavira hall, Lingshan can't even compare, even those on high must cower beneath me." But he also drops a couple of clues about the Destined One's identity, asking, "Who granted your destiny? Sun Wukong? Your mind ever traverses before your husk disperses." This directly foreshadows what happens in chapter 6. If you die, he says this is the consequence of you believing in destiny and not yourself. But we are the Destined One, so we are ultimately victorious in the end. But even then, Yellowbrow has things to say.
我早就看穿了你的下场，只要你还在为他人而战，迟早也会死在他人手上。
I personally think he may actually be addressing Wukong here, because the Destined One isn't really fighting for anyone per se. We're just trying to get the relics. But Wukong did essentially have to serve at the mercy of Buddha, and we saw what happened with that in the prologue battle. But this line is also kind of a warning for the Destined One. If we fall in line again and don the tightening band, we will be doomed to repeat the same fate. Yellowbrow then runs off saying he fights for himself, and honestly, this is a pitiful sight after all his pompous antics. Bursting through the doors, we find ourselves back on the frozen lake where we first met him in chapter 3, and in the light, we can clearly see that his halo of enlightenment was strapped onto his back by meager strings. Even Elder Jingshi from chapter 1 was able to cultivate to the point where you see the halo of light around his head. But Yellowbrow clearly falls short. He refuses to accept defeat and tries to rush to Wukong's relic, but he falls through the cracks into the watery depths. Surprise! The real Mileful has appeared out of thin air, and once again, Zhu Bajie makes a very astute observation.
大肚皮，我早该猜到是你。
恕罪，恕罪。
哼，管你一次我信，管你两次猪都不信。
It's funny because he was often called Daizi in Journey to the West, which is translated as idiot, but he's really subversing expectations in this game. I'm definitely of the opinion that there's no way Yellowbrow was able to pull the same exact tactic twice unless Mileful allowed it. From his journal entry, we know Mileful has knowledge of the future, and in the novel, the whole ordeal with Yellowbrow was one of the 81 trials that Tang Sanzang had to pass, so it's possible Mileful allowed essentially a repeat to happen as a trial for the Destined One, in order to determine if he was indeed the right monkey worthy to acquire all of Wukong's relics. He then borrows Bachia's rake, turns it into a fishing pole, and fishes out the 10-tailed goldfish. At last, we have attained Wukong's third relic, Bi Xiu Ai, nose that smells and loves. As a refresher, in Journey to the West, Wukong killed 5 bandits who were allegorical figures that represented the 5 desires in Buddhism, and one of them was named Bi Xiu Ai. These desires are seen as obstacles to enlightenment, as they lead people away from spiritual focus and toward worldly attachments. So by killing them, it was a symbolic commitment to overcoming these attachments in pursuit of enlightenment. But in Black Myth, we are seeking to reclaim them. But there's a bit more we can uncover from Yellowbrow's story. From his journal entry, we learn of a debate he had with Jing Chanzi. Yellowbrow posits that living beings should follow their nature and that true bliss is to feel each moment to the fullest. To support his claim, he provides examples of mortals who acted in their immediate self-interest, citing starving parents who exchanged their children for food and great generals who massacred entire clans to quench their ambition. But Jing Chanzi disagrees, stating that a moment's bliss leads to an eternity of pain. The parents may have quelled their hunger, but they will regret trading their children for the rest of their lives. The generals may have quenched their bloodlust, but they will never be able to rest easy should others seek revenge. This is the karma of their actions. To this, Yellowbrow retorts, nonsense, which is the very title of the ending animation. Yellowbrow insists that the true meaning of life is the endless karmic cycle of sorrow and bliss, but Jing Chanzi is steadfast that realizing that life is suffering is the true path to enlightenment. In order to prove him wrong, Yellowbrow descends to the mortal realm, where he is pulled from the sea by local fishermen and carried into their town, passing numerous carvings of Buddhist statues etched into the wall of the cliff. It appears he has chosen to take on the form of a large soft-shell turtle, but with a swipe of his claws across his body, he reveals an outpouring of gold and pearls from the cut. Fun fact, there is actually a species of turtle called Zhenju Bie pearl turtle, and it does have a long neck and snout, just like Yellowbrow appears here. The village is home to the old, the destitute, and the sick, and after greeting its inhabitants with a show of this hand gesture called the Akash Mudra, which I read is supposed to help detox the body among other benefits, he bestows his gift upon the people. Turtles in general are considered very auspicious in Chinese culture, and their shells have also been used in Chinese medicine for years, so it's quite fitting that we see him use a fingernail to heal a sick child. But I did not expect him to use mucus to reveal beauty. He also builds homes for the villagers and blesses them with food, but even here we can already see little details that hint this may not all be positive. For example, the tornado he uses to hoist fish from the sea also whips up a boat in its wake and completely destroys it. It symbolizes that the people are no longer trying to be self-sufficient and instead are relying entirely on this benefactor. Soon, the turtle is revered as a deity. The 2 banners flanking his shrine roughly translates to bearing the suffering of all sentient beings, now entering the place of eternal bliss and non-action. These banners allude to what Yellowbrow's true plans are in Black Myth. His prominence only grows from there, as his visage soon graces the walls of the cliff and the villagers build him an actual temple. This temple attracts pilgrims and what I assume to be rather wealthy visitors, since they're being carried up the steps. There's also a bunch of other texts that we can see here. For example, this couplet reflects Buddhist themes of enlightenment and good karma, drawing imagery from the Pure Land, a place of spiritual cultivation and auspicious energy. Other text here suggests that the fishing village may have begun to compare itself to Penglai. For context, Penglai is a mythical island often described as a paradise. It is often depicted as a floating or unreachable island shrouded in mist, which protects it from mortal reach. Penglai represents spiritual attainment and enlightenment, where only the pure of heart or those with divine favor can reach it. So the implication here is Yellowbrow wants to establish a new Pure Land or a paradise for himself. The thing is, if you're starving, all you want is food. If you're sick, all you want is to be healed. But now that these immediate needs are taken care of by this seemingly benevolent turtle deity, there is only room for other desires to grow. I think an actual deity would impart wisdom and teachings so people can learn to overcome any negative vices that stem from their desires. However, Yellowbrow continues to nurture their desires in a very cunning way by constantly giving them more with no other spiritual guidance. One fateful night, everything reaches a critical point. The monks and villagers are all gathered in reverence as Yellowbrow bestows his blessings and bureaucrats distribute the pearls to the people. Something to note here is that while the village seemed to prosper, somehow most of the people still look destitute. So did their lives actually improve with Yellowbrow? One of these villagers looks absolutely mesmerized, and Yellowbrow pulls him forward. As if in a trance, the man rushes forward and slashes the turtle, sending pearls cascading to the ground. Guards rush forward to protect the creature, but other villagers pile ahead, ripping at the turtle's body with their bare hands, hoping to claim some of its riches for themselves. Soon, even the guards who try to stop the carnage are entranced by the gold, and Yellowbrow smiles in glee even as they rip him apart. This scene is notably spliced against imagery of a dead carcass as sharks and fish of all sizes prowl and circle around the carrion, visually indicating that these humans are descending into the behavior of beasts. Monks who chant for wisdom have now cast their piety aside in favor of stealing pearls off the ground and indulging in carnal pleasure. Men even urinate upon their benefactor, a major sign of disrespect. Even children are participating. The next day, the village lies decrepit once more. Jing Chanzi approaches the wretched carcass of the soft-shell turtle, and Yellowbrow tells him that he's won yet again, that he's proven human nature is evil. However, Jing Chanzi counters that by intentionally encouraging chaos in human hearts, the end result has become the cause. You reap what you sow. Therefore, Yellowbrow's victory doesn't actually prove anything because he stacked the odds to manipulate the situation in order to win. Case in point, when the ministers are distributing the pearls and logging the transactions, characters on the page appears to include the names of other villages and towns. Especially given that Yellowbrow says he won again, this would suggest he's either repeated the same tactic in a different town, or if the fishing village didn't pan out like he intended, he could move on to one of the others. Also remember what I explained in my chapter 1 video. Guan Yin said to Wukong in Journey to the West, the only thing that separates a bodhisattva and a yao is a single thought. This is explicitly demonstrated in the story with the white fox and non-void. The scholar saved the fox first, but because of a nightmare, the scholar thought the white fox was evil and he ended up committing an actual evil act. So applying this to chapter 3's ending animation, the only thing Yellowbrow proved is that human nature is complex. By constantly giving the villagers more pearls and blessings without any other spiritual guidance, of course that's just going to nurture the seed of greed that we all have the potential to grow. But if you were to lead them with spiritual teachings, this would then cultivate the Buddha nature that every living being has. At the end of it all though, these two still remain on diametrically opposing sides, with Yellowbrow stating that there's no point in arguing over human nature if he can't win. So what does this all even mean? On the surface level, there's a lot of discourse about the right way to Buddhism and morality, with a question about whether human nature is good or evil. It's also clearly shown that Yellowbrow's obsession is his ego, which I think arguably stems from his inferiority complex. Literally everything he does, from the way he speaks with gravitas, the garish way he dresses, the way he built a needlessly large temple because he wanted to match Lingshan, he massively overcompensates for his humble beginnings as a chime boy and tries to raise himself above others through these external methods. But everything he does is a copy and a farce. Tang Sanzang had 4 disciples, so he got 4 disciples. Buddha has his realm in the West, so he made the New West. Buddhism has its set precepts, so he made his own doctrine as well. And just like the Black Bear Guai in chapter 1 and the Yellow Wind Sage in chapter 2, Yellowbrow also participated in the prologue battle against Sun Wukong and was rewarded with the Nose Relic. We've seen these relics amplify the proclivities of their bearer, so it made Yellowbrow's ego even worse. But by virtue of the fact that he does not follow Buddhist precepts, he can never achieve the enlightenment required to actually become a Buddha. Therefore, he was never going to win. If we dig a bit deeper, I would argue that the true takeaway is actually about power. If we go back to the source material, yes, Journey to the West includes Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucianist teachings, but the stories originated as peasant folk tales, so scholars who study the novel have argued it's more about criticizing and exposing the dark side of bureaucracy and those who are in power. From all the journal entries, we can see that Yellowbrow uses religion as a tool to exert control over others. His goal was to amass power. Why? I would say it's because he wanted to free himself from the same fate that awaited Sun Wukong, where if you keep fighting for others, in time, you'll fall by their hands. We actually saw this happen with the third prince in this chapter. Remember I said earlier his squad of 5 was a foil to Tang Senzang's squad of 5. On paper, the third prince had all the markings of a true hero. He overcame his childhood illness, he was very strong, he was known throughout the land for defeating fearsome enemies, and he was a devout Buddhist. In another story, he could have been the destined one. But look at him now. Blind, deaf, all 4 captains dead. And while he was suffering at the hands of Yellowbrow, he called out to his master, Bodhisattva Guo Shiwang, every time, but he never answered. Where was he? Perhaps he had to let these events play out because this was a predestined trial for us as the destined one. Just like how Bodhisattva Guanyin let all the monks burn to death at her temple, because that was one of the 81 predestined trials Tang Senzang had to face. No matter what the true reason is, the third prince was loyal to his master, but in the end, he still ended up in this pitiful state. What is the point of serving the celestial court or Buddhist deities if this is the fate that awaits their followers? When they are willing to sacrifice their devout disciples, all for what? Maintaining order? In Yellowbrow's case, if he could just become powerful enough, if he could eliminate his former enemies, if he could amass allies, if he could take Milefo's place, then he would no longer be under anyone's rule and could live for himself. Freedom. And isn't that what Wukong wanted too? And considering what we've learned in previous chapters, we've clearly seen the celestial court and Buddhist deities use order and religion to exert their will over others. In Black Myth, Wukong's tightening band is literally a tool for control. So it's not actually about good versus evil or right punishing wrong. That's just the pretext to justify their actions. We've seen numerous examples from Journey to the West and Black Myth where characters are subjected to capital punishment, not summoning the correct amount of rain, death, breaking a pearl, death, wanting freedom, death. None of this is punishing evil. Therefore, it simply boils down to power and control. As further evidence, fast-forwarding to Chapter 5's ending animation, we hear Erlangshen hand out Wukong's relics to the Yaoguai kings. He praises all of them for their good behavior, except Yellowbrow.
王梅，你重振旗鼓，彼此收好。
Your power has gathered anew. Remember what Ma Tianba said about the Yellow Wind Sage in Chapter 2? A rat only climbs high because someone set up a ladder. Similarly, a chime boy only gathers power because someone allowed it. I will be fair, Milefo did help us by teaching us Spellbinder and letting an old friend stay at the Great Pagoda. We know he's playing a game too. And this whole ordeal with Yellowbrow is likely a test he set up for the destined one. But because Milefo allowed Yellowbrow to amass power again, literally repeating the same exact process, stealing the exact same artifacts as the first time, how many characters suffered? Kang is dead, the third prince is broken, the people who built the temple got turned into terrifying lantern guai, and thousands of other unnamed disciples are frozen in the snow. This is why I personally would consider Milefo a more neutral character. But to be clear, this doesn't mean I'm anti-Baby Buddha. In Buddhism, it is said that there will come a time where Rulaifo's teachings will fade due to human ignorance and the world will fall into selfishness. Milefo is prophesied to reintroduce Buddhist teachings at this time and lead people back onto the path of liberation. In Black Myth storyline, it does seem like we are in a period where moral and spiritual decay is quite prevalent, but there's still more to be revealed, especially regarding how far the Celestial Pantheon will go to keep their power, which we'll uncover in future chapters. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching all the way through this very long video. I am truly grateful for the privilege of your time and hope the video was illuminating. Let me know what you thought about Chapter 3 in the comments and how you interpreted the story. My Chapter 4 breakdown is coming up next, and I think this was a favorite for a lot of players, so definitely plenty to discuss. Until then, subscribe.